This is where I confess, I am a chronically glass half full person. I'm always looking for the good. I have this pathological problem where there is always something good going on. And whether or not that is absolutely helpful or not, I'm really not sure. But I read articles like this, which is the article Carl quoted from a little bit earlier. And I have a PhD student looking at how the media portrays children and technology and gaming. And when I look at those kinds of articles, that shakes my glass half full. So today, as we chat, I'm going to start, you've got me for 2 sessions, sorry about that. So we're going to start with healthy use and what does that look like. I'm trying to paint some broad brush strokes there so that I don't step on Ben's toes or any of the other speakers later today. I was really conscious that we need to talk about some of the issues without getting into too much depth, because I'm sure they'll talk about that when they get to the bad and the ugly. So we'll talk about healthy media use in this first session, and then we'll start chatting about, well, let's look at the good, which is where you see my glass half full side come out, and I will be unapologetically open about how exciting some of the opportunities in technology for our young children and children in primary years are in particular. So before we get going, let me tell you a bit about me. I started off as a school teacher, and I started off teaching in a beautiful school, working with a kindergarten classroom. I loved my teaching. I spent 5 years teaching kindy. I then moved on to another school and taught kindergarten year 1, and then moved through a few other grades, which is, an amazing experience. I then discovered these things called robotic toys, and I suddenly went, wow, these change the way children think. And I got very excited about robotic toys and then moved into a PhD on robotics and then starting looking at how technology works. But what's come out of that is a question for me, which is, what do we value for our children? What are your espoused beliefs and philosophies? What are the things that you value for your children? I value quality thinking. I value thinking that goes beyond base level drill and practice thinking, and we'll come back to that a few times today. I value when children can problem solve and communicate and reason, and when children can have a childhood that's wow rather than So that's me. Many years ago, Mark Prensky talked about an idea of digital natives and digital immigrants. Now, interestingly, his idea has fairly much been roundly refuted, but one of the ideas that came out of this was the idea that young children growing up today are digital natives. They've been born into this digital world. I like to talk about my mother in this instance and say she's living as a digital immigrant. She wasn't born into this world, and until very recently, she used to send blank text messages. Blank text messages were code for, please call me darling. What I love, though, is that as a digital immigrant, she's now become a joyful digital immigrant. We gave them or forced them, I'm not sure which it was, to have an iPad. And all of a sudden, my mother is loving being in the digital world. She's gone from being a reluctant immigrant, really not loving this new country she was living in, to a new digital immigrant where she is loving living in this digital environment, where she Skypes with the grandchildren, sends them text messages, and believe it or not, she's even taking video at the soccer field or the cricket pitch and showing it to her grandchildren. Now, what excites me about that is that for us as a community of learners engaging today, we're all coming to this from digital positions, from different digital positions. Whether we're natives who've been born in this world or whether we're moving into the digital world, we're all standing at different areas where some of us are looking in thinking, wow, this is amazing. Others of us are looking in going, oh, I'm a bit nervous about this. But hopefully today, as you chat through today and look at some good, some bad, and some darn right ugly, you'll get a better picture of what this digital world is looking like. So my task today is to look at healthy use of technology, and by healthy we mean healthy in all aspects. We're talking about physiological health, psychological health, emotional health. We're looking at healthy in the broad perspective. In this first section, we're also going to look at why is this hard? What is it that game designers do that makes this hard, particularly for our young children and teens?
And then we're going to look at how can we harness some of these tools in learning, and that's the second session that you've got me for this morning. So for the next 29 minutes or so, we're going to look at healthy media and focus in on healthy media. And in particular, we'll then try and work through all of those things. So I guess the beginning question is, what is healthy media use? What do we mean? What are we concerned about? Well, of course, we're concerned about a range of things. We're concerned about access to inappropriate content. For example, did you know that many images of girls in games and through televised media, through advertising, are highly sexualised? Did you know that many girls are perceiving themselves as not quite perfect because they don't look like Barbie? Now, even if we protect our youth from seeing these images on television, they're seeing them in their mobile devices and in their game consoles. Children are exposed to images of advertising and advertising that may or may not be appropriate content. Part of my role and part of the joy of working with ACCM is to help them look at some apps and look at appropriate apps. And what's really scary about looking at apps for children is that many developers, so that the apps pay money, embed advertising. And those are little teeny tiny banner ads. And as adults, we don't seem to even look at the advertising. But we know that young children in particular get really distracted by advertising. We know that children, as they look at the advertising, are often confused with where is the game and where is the advertising. We also know that many advertisers are quite ruthless in their targeting and marketing to children. You know, we sometimes worry about healthy food and junk food marketing, but perhaps we also need to be worrying more, or perhaps more so, we need to be worrying about the other types of games that are being advertised. So when we're looking at healthy media use, we're worried about content. That's the big issue, a big issue. So advertising and content. We're also worried about what this does for children's mental health and what it does for children in terms of how does social media impact on bullying. And in fact, social media and bullying is an incredibly huge topic, particularly for those working in youth. And when we consider healthy use of media, is it appropriate for boys to be seeing images of girls constantly in their social media profile? Is it appropriate that some of our teenage girls have perfected the perfect pout so that they look the most beautiful that they possibly can? You know, is it appropriate that we have a generation of children taking selfies? I spent the weekend with some very young children, and I was fascinated to notice one of the young girls who was about 3. As soon as the camera came out, she instantly stood up straight and smiled. Is that what childhood is? Is that healthy? I don't know. I don't know that it's the child. Well, I know that it's not the childhood I grew up with, and I don't know whether it's healthy. Is it appropriate that children who are using media and devices spend more than 2 hours a day? What does that do to their physiological health? What does that do to eyesight? What does that do to sedentary behaviour? What about a child who's seeing gaming that is inappropriate? What about a child who's playing games that depict violence or normalise inappropriate content, such as one of the racing car games that actually you earn more points if you run over a police car? There's a game that many children like playing where, in fact, the whole goal is what to do and when the brakes fail on the car. Is that appropriate? We're joking about things that perhaps we shouldn't be joking about. Car accidents are terrible things. Failing brakes is a terrible thing. So when we play with that concept, what does that do for the moral code of our society? There's lots of negatives, aren't there? Sort of a bit depressing, isn't it? You know, for me, I very firmly believe that the genie with technology is out of the bottle. We can't put the technology back, and although some of us would like to go back to Amish times, we're not going there. I did visit Amish territory, and their lifestyle is phenomenal. I really do have some moments where I envy the fact that they have very little or no technology, and certainly in watching their youth, their culture is growing up in a way that is more familiar to me, although we weren't obviously completely isolated. So if the genie is out of the bottle, how do we take all of these negative things? How do we take cyberbullying? How do we take sexualized images of children? How do we take overt advertising? How do we take concerns with focus and attention control? How do we take all of that and actually make this healthy? And I have a message, and unfortunately it's not a very sexy message. The media don't like hearing this message, but the message is that what we need to have is, you ready for it? We need balance. We need to balance digital lives with real lives. We need to balance real world play with digital play. And I think we're putting our head in the sand when we only focus on no technology, or saying technology is bad, or technology is harming childhood, or where we put technology in the place of as the demon. And there are many people who demonize technology. I don't think that message is helpful for us because the genie is firmly out of the bottle. So the question becomes, how do we get to balance? What does balance look like, and how on earth can we actually get there? And hopefully that's what we'll get to today. So as we're looking at this, what we're looking at most importantly is quality and quantity. And there's two different concepts here that I want to sort of cover as we're talking about healthy media. The first one, of course, is quantity, how much screen time children have. The second one is what is presented in that screen time, and is it quality? Okay? So we're going to have a quick play now. And we're actually going to play a game that I may or may not be slightly addicted to, that is incredibly macabre and absolutely inappropriate. But I want to show it to you not because I think it's a wonderful game, but in fact because it is a truly scary game. It's been in the top charts in Australia for a very long period of time, and it's a game that many of our children really like. It's called CriminalCase. Now, who's watched NCIS or CSI or any of those television shows? In this particular game, you become one of those criminal case workers. And I'm going to turn down our volume so that we can chat as we go. So I am Corporal Kate. I am a police officer, and I have risen through the ranks as Corporal Kate, and I've got my bonus points for the day. Oh, look, I've got some messages. Now, just so you know, my messages are fake messages because I'm not actually connected to anyone through social media. But if I had connected this through my social media, I would be seeing messages from my real world friends, which is where our real and our virtual collide. Okay? So here are two of my virtual friends, Judge Hall and Ramirez, who've given me, Judge Hall, she's given me some energy. That's fantastic. And Ramirez, he's given me some points as well. Oh, that's nice. Because I come back frequently, I'm getting a daily bonus. Oh, look, I get 1,000 points. Oh, fantastic, a daily bonus. So the game is wanting to connect to my social world. The game is wanting me to come back and play daily. Okay? So then what we see here is we've got a range of cases going on, and I'm up to case number 12. And if we look at case number 12, within this case, and I do apologise now if you are a small child watching this, switch away now. This is not for small children. As we look at this case, I have the case of a dead body. And in fact, this is a case where a trader has been found as a dead person, and I've already identified my victim. I then have a series of crime scenes that I have to investigate and find certain objects in the crime scenes. Now, the crime scenes themselves, after you've found the dead body and the murder weapon and sent the body to be autopsied, the crime scenes themselves look, to all intensive purposes, just like a hunt where you have to find certain objects. I'll show you a quick example. In fact, we'll do just a very quick one so that you get the idea. It costs me points, energy to play the game, and I have a partner. So this is me on the left. It hasn't quite worked out. I've grown my hair. I have earned a dog, and part of my game, the goal with the dog is that I have to actually feed it every day. It gets upset if I don't feed the dog, so I've got an emotional response to come back and check my dog has been fed. So are you ready to investigate, my friends? Down the bottom of the game, we're going to see some things we have to find, and then we have to find them in the main area. So I'm investigating. Okay, I need to find some sunglasses. Oh, let me see. Can I find the sunglasses? Oh gosh, I can't see them. If you see them, come and let me know. Oh, I found the crown. I found a stack of cash. Oh, great, fantastic. A bowling ball. That's a weird place for a bowling ball. Interesting. A bow tie. No, that's not a bow tie. Wonder whether you've got the idea. Now, what's interesting about this as we play here, it's pretty innocuous, isn't it? You're just hunting for things. But let's take a step back and think about what are you actually doing here. You're finding clues to solve a case, to work out who killed someone. And if I come back and look at those front pages, in fact, I've had to identify a dead body and send them to a morgue. I'm wondering, is this appropriate? I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned because on this game, it actually calls on us to connect socially with other people and get extra points by connecting with socially. I'm also concerned because it normalises violence and death in a way that I don't believe our youth should be exposed to. I'm concerned here that the game itself is calling me to come back every day because I get a bonus by coming back and because I want to feed that dog. I've got an empathetic relationship with that dog. So the question then becomes, what do I do when my child's playing this sort of game? How can I have a conversation with them? Now, I should tell you, with that particular example, the child who showed me that example said, "Oh, Kate, this is the best game ever. All you have to do is find stuff." And I, on the surface, playing the level we just played then or a similar level, we found stuff. And I thought, oh yeah, this is okay. But it's only when you take that deeper look and you actually co-play that you realise that this is about death, dying and murder. And some of the murder scenes are incredibly grotesque. Some of the murder scenes within that are really adults only. But if I chat further about this game, although it is in the adult section of the App Store, if we look further, we know that young children are playing it. We also know that parents are playing it and they don't understand that their children are also accessing it. And we know that this is a very popular game through social media, through Facebook. So that many parents are playing the game through social media, their children are observing that play and they're normalising that kind of engagement. Now, it's always really tricky for me when I talk about healthy use of media to not get on my high horse, to not jump on a soapbox and feel all moralistic about this. But when I play games like that, I think we've got to get a message out there, that there is some content out there that is downright inappropriate. There's some content out there that really is scary and some content out there that we don't want our children, even our teens, playing. Having said that, there is also some content that is amazingly good, some content that is fun and engaging and enables our kids to think in new and creative ways. So let's jump and look at some of those. Oh, so many things to look at. I think we might jump into preschool. Carl, can you come up with me? Would you like to be Big Ted or Little Ted?
Little Ted.
You're going to be Little Ted. So this is an app called Art Maker. This is deliberately designed for our preschoolers, and I'm happy to show it because I was part of the Ed developer team that made it. It's also one of Australia's most popular and free downloadable apps, and we're switching right from adults and adults only right down to our youngest children. Come on over, Carl. So where would you like to go? The beach? How about we go to a farm?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome.
On a day like
Off
today.
to the farm we go.
Fantastic. Okay, you said Big Ted?
Big,
You're going to be Big Ted?
all right,
Big
I'll be
Ted.
I said
All right.
Little Ted, but I'll be Big
Oh,
Ted.
well, I'll be Big Ted and you can be Little Ted.
Right.
Okay. So, Carl, we're about to put on a show.
Yep.
We're going to record a video together.
Yep.
You ready?
Yep.
I don't know what Little Ted sounds like, but we'll see how you go.
Get ready to move your toys and make some noise.
Hi, Little Ted. Welcome to my farm.
Hi, Big Ted. I'm glad to be here.
What are you doing? You're standing on a hill.
Well, I can see more from there.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to go really high, all the way up here.
Wow.
I'm so high you can't see my head.
You're going to fall off if you're not careful.
Oh, dear. I hope I don't fall off. Oh, no!
Oh, my head. You bumped me on the head.
Thank you. I think we need to give Carl a clap. Hi, little kid. Welcome to my farm.
Hi, Big Ted.
You've got the idea.
You're standing on a hill.
Okay. Now, we see two very different things when we look at those games. One is in CriminalCase, where I'm starting to consume media. I'm consuming pre-made content. I'm consuming content that is inappropriate. I'm also consuming content that has a whole series of triggers in there, social connections, the need to come back, the fact that I'm rewarded every day. All of these triggers that are linking to addictive behaviour. Now, for those of you who have heard me talk about children and addiction before, I actually don't believe children under the age of 8 are addicted. I know that is somewhat controversial. I know that many of my psychologist friends disagree with me, but I believe very firmly that children under 8 are actually allowed. I welcome the hate mail now. When we're working with children under the age of 8, we have to actually be their protectors, their guides and their teachers. And part of that is not allowing addictive behaviour to form. For our older children, which is where we see tendencies towards addiction, this is where games such as CriminalCase that have all of those triggers, the need to come back daily, the winning of points, the social connection, all of those triggers, that can lead to addiction. The second game we looked at, which was ABC Art Maker, a free app for our youngest children, is to me one of those apps where I go, okay, there is hope here. There is hope for me in this app because I'm not consuming pre-made content that might not align with my worldview, but because I'm creating content, and because I'm creating content, it therefore has to align with my worldview. So when we're looking at apps, there is always going to be a good, a bad, and an ugly. And as we go through the day today, I'm sure that you'll start to see some of those ideas. When we're looking at apps and media and television, we've also got to take in the idea of quantity. So we've got the concept of quality, and now we've got the concept of quantity. I'm often asked by journalists, is it quantity or quality? And in actual fact, it's both. In some ways, quality overrides quantity for me. I don't worry about quantity of time if a child is creating a digital movie or perhaps writing a book or Skyping with grandma. We'd never stop a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old from Skyping with grandma because it was a quality conversation. Whereas we may stop a teenager from playing games that are repetitive or inappropriate. So we've got to balance this idea of quality and quantity. And when we look at quantity, the question arises, how much is too much? So Carl mentioned earlier that our youngest children are meant to have no screen time. As my friend Dr. Christy Goodhue says, babies need laps, not apps. Isn't that a nice catch cry? Babies need laps, not apps. I wish I could take that one. It's not mine, it's my friend Christy Goodhue's. Christy also has an amazing website and I believe a book coming out that would be helpful for you as children think about their use of media and technology, and particularly as we navigate research and practice for parents. When we're looking at our slightly older children, we start to look at 1 hour of screen time up to 2 hours of screen time. And I should emphasise here that we're talking about recreational screen time. So we're not so worried about what they're doing at school. These guidelines come from the Australian Department of Health, and they're focusing more on quantity in recreational time. Now, you heard me, I did say Department of Health, so they don't mind about brains, they're not worried about psychology, they're not worried about emotions, they're worried about physicality, about physical health. And the key area that they're worried about is displacement of physical activity, and they're worried about sedentary behaviour. Because if I'm sitting on my bottom watching television or sitting on the couch playing with an app, I'm engaging in sedentary behaviour, which means I'm not running around, which of course means I'm not getting fit or staying fit. So we've already mentioned that our babies should have no screen time. So from birth to 2, we say no screen time. That's talking about both foreground activities, such as watching the television, playing an app, and it's talking about background television, such as having the news on in the background. Now, we know from using background television, this is a study by Anderson and Pempek years ago, that parent interaction decreases when the television is on in the background. And of course, in those first 2 years, we've got so much activity occurring around the development of communication skills. And so we want to give every opportunity for our youngest children to be communicating. For children aged between 2 and 5 years, we focus on up to 1 hour of recreational screen time a day. But if you think about it, a child who's watched a half-hour episode of Preschool and then played apps for a few minutes throughout the day, they're exceeding that hour of screen time very quickly. For our older children, we're focusing on up to 2 hours of recreational screen time. One of the questions I'm asked frequently is, but who makes this stuff up? How do we have these recommendations? Well, in Australia, our current guidelines come from the Department of Health. I am working with a number of organisations, including Early Childhood Australia and the Australian Council on Children and the Media, where we look at some Australian guidelines that actually take into the cognitive aspects as well as physicality. In America, there are 2 sets of guidelines. One comes from the American Academy of Paediatricians, and they take a more holistic view. And the second set of guidelines in America come from the National Association of Young Children and Early Childhood. Now, what excites me about those American guidelines is that what they've done in developing them is they've actually done an analysis of all of the research literature. And they only updated their guidelines a few years ago, and they're in the process of looking at new guidelines. What I love about the American guidelines is that if you look up the American Academy of Paediatricians' work, you can actually see all of the research that they're using to justify their thinking and explain their rationale. In Australia, we've really got to work on that bit, and hopefully we'll get there in the next few years. I think in some ways we've been caught by surprise by the immersive nature of mobile and tablet technology, and perhaps we're playing a bit of a catch-up game there. What's interesting about these guidelines is that most of them are based on research, and in part, some of that research is growing. So we've got a very different thing occurring between a child watching television and a child playing an app. Did you know that blood flow actually can diminish when a child is watching television? So blood flow to the brain can actually be reduced as a child switches off as they're watching television. When a child plays an app, however, blood flow to the brain in certain parts of the brain can actually increase. So we see very different things about screen time, and when we group screen time together, even though that idea of screen time is largely based on research, in fact, we probably need to separate out watching television from interactive multimedia and playing games. These 2 things are quite different. The other interesting thing here is that whilst at the moment these guidelines are set, there is always going to be movement, particularly as research really unpacks what is the impact of interactive multimedia on our young children's lives. And we're only just finding out about that impact of media and interactive media on young children. Well, we've had television for many decades. We've only had these eye devices that have had such immersion, the iPad in particular, since 2010. So we're really still catching up on the research and how that impacts on children, particularly longitudinally. For instance, one of the authors of the guidelines that's about babies having no screen time has recently come out and said, well, perhaps screen time that promotes communication may be appropriate. Now, I'm not actually saying that that's what we need to do. I do agree with my colleague that says that babies need laps, not apps. But I do want you to be aware that this space is moving. This space is not set in concrete, and we do need to be aware that the guidelines and the recommendations are changing as we develop research in that area. As you look at researchers, including myself, we're all getting old and a bit slow. And what happens as we get old and slow is it takes us a while to get ethics approval to do these studies, to collect the sample, to analyse the data, and then get published. And it can take up to 5 years to publish data. In fact, I've got a paper that's been sitting there waiting to be published for 4.5 years, which means that some of the research that comes out is actually a little bit delayed. And that delay in the research mentality really does impact on the guidelines and on what we know is best for children. And I guess what we're talking about here is that we need to watch this space and we need to be aware that the research is constantly evolving. So how on earth do we do those guidelines? How do I get a teenage child to actually turn off the device? How do I get a 3-year-old to put the iPad away without having a screaming tantrum on the floor? How do I get to that stage? Well, the first thing we need to know is that watching television is still king. children are most likely to watch screens using television or watch televised media on their screens. So, of course, one of the easiest ways to do that is to turn off the device. Just turn off the television, put the remote away, hide it away. But when we're looking at our youngest children and using mobile and tablet devices, putting the device away is not so easy because the device itself is in the car, it's in our handbags, it's available at the doctor's surgery, and yesterday I saw a child using it in the supermarket, sitting in the trolley, merrily playing games and watching videos. I think it was Peppa Pig in the supermarket. When we look at some of the data on this and on how children are using these devices, it's really interesting to know that Australian data is quite limited. Behind the News, the television show from the ABC, recently released some data, and they particularly looked at 18,000 children. Now, what's exciting about these 18,000 children is that when they analyse their data, these are children reporting their own media use, which means that we're not going to have so many parents putting a halo effect on board. What's exciting here is that we're starting to see some patterns of use. What's scary here is that we're seeing overuse of media. And in particular, 56% of children use more than 2 hours of media each day. That's a lot of media, isn't it? More than 56%. If you'd like to read further, the ABC has an archive on this, and if you just look for the Behind the News website around that, it's a great episode to play to your children, to share with them, and to use as a discussion starter. Some of my colleagues who work with youth in Sydney have watched this episode with their children and then developed their own survey and done their own analysis and created their own episode of Behind the News that follows those segments. So we come to the question of why is this a problem? And my colleagues at Common Sense Media have suggested it's a problem that needs more research, particularly when we're looking at internet addiction, gaming and problematic media use, that this is an area that needs significant research. We also need to acknowledge that our digital lifestyles may be causing harm, and in particular I'm concerned about children who are having multiple screens going on at the one time and the fact that they're trying to multitask, whereas in fact they're switching their attention very quickly between those screens. We need to know that media and technology is a great source of stress in some homes. Who's had an argument with a teenager lately? And that, of course, that too much media may be related to lower empathy and lower social skills. On the flip side of that, some teens in particular find the technology as beneficial in forming a social group and forming that peer relationship. And that finally we need to really focus in on having a balanced approach to media and technology. And if we're going to do that, our job as role models is really key. So in my house, we try and turn off the tech at night time. We try and pop it on the kitchen bench to be charged. Every night, 9 o'clock, all of us, the tech goes on the bench to be charged. Now, in fact, I think I'm the one who finds that hardest, and if my husband watches this, he will be rolling on the floor laughing because he knows that that doesn't happen every day in my house. But what's important is that we as the adults take that role of thinking, well, I have to practice what I preach, I have to talk the talk as well as walking the walk. If I expect my teens to have screen-free time, then I need to make sure that I'm also having screen-free time. If I want my toddler to communicate with me, then how do they communicate when there's a phone between the two of us? I have to be the role model. And that's not a palatable message for many of us. There is a lot of work on whether we are addicted, and I touched on that a little bit earlier. But I also want to highlight another resource for those of you working with children of primary and high school age, and that comes from Behind the News. And Behind the News have an episode on media addiction and whether we are addicted. And I'd really encourage you to touch base on that if you like. So as we look at this and we look at why this is hard, we come to the idea of game mechanics. And this is hard because game designers design their games so that we want to come back and play and play and play. And my friend Philip Tam talks about 3 Fs, and I'd like to very quickly unpack those 3 Fs. I do know that it's 10 o'clock now, Carl, so I'll roll these 2 things into one. The first reason that games are hard to get rid of is that I have a thing called fun frustration. Fun frustration occurs when something is fun but a little bit frustrating, which means I want to come back and get better at it. As we start to look at apps in our next section on harnessing educational apps, you'll see that fun frustration is a really powerful tool. The second F is a sense of fiero, which I believe comes from the Italian word, and I do apologise, which means fire or something like that. And it's that sense of, yes, I've got it. I remember very distinctly as a 17-year-old learning to reverse park, and I reverse parked on a hill without stalling the car. I remember the chemical reaction in my brain where endorphins were released when I went, yes, I've got it. That same chemical reaction is occurring as children succeed in games. As children feel a sense of mastery of, oh, I've got it, I got the bad guy, I hit the next level. I'm having a small response that is almost the same. It's not exactly the same, but very similar. That sense of fiero, that yes, I've got it, is the second F. The third F is something called flow. And flow occurs for many adults as we're reading a great novel and we want to read to the next chapter. It also happens as we're binge watching Netflix and we want to watch the next episode of The Good Wife and then the next episode of The Good Wife and the next episode of The Good Wife. Or I believe Orange is the New Black is the other one that's very popular in Adelaide, that people are watching on Netflix and they want to keep watching the next episode and the next episode and the next episode. Flow occurs when I lose track of time, when I play a level of a game and then another level of a game and another level of a game. And essentially those three Fs, which are just some of the many game mechanics, you'll hear some of our other speakers talk about other game mechanics, draw children in, and they're a little bit like a hook that makes the child want to come back and play more and more and more. The second thing that goes on here, apart from the three Fs, is the huge role of dopamine. And dopamine, for those of you who aren't sure, is a chemical in our bodies that leaves us wanting more. And essentially when dopamine is released in our body, it happens because it's been stimulated. When something good happens, it stimulates a reward pathway, which is the mesolimbic dopamine. Oh, I can't say that at this time of the morning. I need more coffee to be able to say that word. But essentially it releases and opens up that dopamine pathway. As that dopamine is released into our body, it calls our brain to pay attention. And as we pay attention to that over time, our brain seeks that response more and more often, and we become less sensitive to dopamine. What that means is that for a child who has for a teen or for an adult who has an interest in gaming, they might be seeing a dopamine response, which means they want to come back and have more and more of it. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that Ben might talk about this a little bit more in his sessions. And I think it's really important to understand that children who are playing a lot are actually having a physiological response to their games and to the games they play. So I think it's time now to have some hope. Okay, you've seen some of the negatives. You've seen some of the concerns that are going on. So what on earth do we do as parents and teachers? How do we get some hope? And I know a few people were here in the sessions last night, and our goal here, and so this slide actually comes straight from that. We use this with our children as well as with the parents. Our goal when talking about technology and media use is to help the child to self-regulate. Our real goal is to have the child want to turn off the device. But it's really hard to turn off the device, isn't it? If I'm stuck in that sense of flow and fun frustration and having that biochemical release because I've got fiero going on, I'm not going to want to turn off the device. So, of course, as with all things, we actually need to teach self-regulation. We need to give our children the opportunity to have time to move away from the technology and time to develop skills where they begin to self-regulate. Now, as we're teaching self-regulation, I need to be really clear here. I'm not talking about nagging. It's a different thing. Nagging happens when teaching isn't working. What instead we need to do is to have really good conversations to help children move away from the technology and to help them transition. And that's both timing and helping them do other things other than the tech. So, of course, timing is important. And in fact, one of the things you can do is set a timer, set the kitchen timer, set the egg timer, or for those of you using an Apple device, you can also use your clock and set the alarm in here. So if I set the alarm for about 2 minutes, in fact, I'll set it for 3, I can set either a sound to play, which gives me a cognitive prompt that it's time to turn off, or if I come all the way down to the bottom of my timer, I can set my timer so that it stops playing. What that will do at the end of this time is it will go to the lock screen. Now, most children know what the lock code is and they can get themselves back into the game, but what it does is cause a cognitive prompt that says, that's enough time. And hopefully, as we go through, we get the opportunity to help our children understand that enough time is something that's beneficial for them as well. Another idea is to give children, instead of pocket money, give them technology time. So pebbles in a jar to indicate how much time they have. This idea has been used by many theorists, and it seems to be a very popular tool because it really makes that concept of time very visual so that we can see that idea of I get more time or less time. Also, as children use up their time, they can see their time being used. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be pebbles. It could be tokens or pieces of paper or any other idea, just a concept to make time visible. We also need to have an idea where we can move beyond the technology, and an I'm bored jar again is quite a popular idea, and they've been around for many years. In fact, we had one when I was a child where my mother had written ideas of things to do on paper and we could draw them out of a hat. The idea with the I'm bored jar is that it's not turn off the device. It becomes, hey, you're doing a great job, and as you turn off the device, would you like to have a go at the I'm bored jar? If you work together with your child to develop skills and activities and ideas of things that they want to do as they're finishing playing, then hopefully they're not only being told that they have to turn off the device, but they're actually being able to move to things that they want to do as they move away from the tech. There's also an app for you as you're starting to look at moving away from the tech, as you're starting to evaluate the tech. And I'm really excited to be part of this launch of our app today, where we start to look at and help parents look at what is appropriate use of tech and how do I know what's appropriate. So this is a free app from the Australian Council on Children and the Media. This does link to the web, so you do have to be online to access it. But what it does is that it gives us quickly and easily access to app reviews so I can start to see what is appropriate for different ages of children. See, I'm throwing some help out there. Healthy use of media is not all bad, especially when we have good conversations. So as you can see here, the app uses a very simple colour coding system, red, orange and green, that allows you to look at whether an app has appropriate content for various ages. So green means it's all good, go for it, all ages is appropriate. Red, oh gosh, you probably want to think twice about that. And orange is a bit more of a maybe zone. If you want to read further about the colour guide, there's some information about the colour guide. But I do want to point out a couple of things when we look at the app reviews. One that's there that's orange is actually one of my favourite apps. Interesting, isn't it? The reason Chroma Kids is an orange app is not because it's showing gambling or inappropriate content, but because it requires you to connect with other people. It requires you to connect with others online, and some parents may be concerned with that. So what this site is about, what this app is about, is giving you quick and easy access of things to think about. So if you look at Lego Movie Maker, it's pretty straightforward, great, no problems, no concerns by the reviewers at ACCM. Whereas if you look at Chroma Kids, there's something that may concern some parents. What this is about is forewarned is forearmed and gives you some quick insight. I can search for apps specifically, or I can also search for age suitability or indeed for platform of app. I do want to emphasise that ACCM relies on volunteers and it relies on amazing reviewers. So if you've got an app review that you think should be there, don't get grumpy it's not there, but instead participate and submit your own review of an app. If you see an app has changed and there's now something that they need to be aware of, they would really welcome you indicating that to them, and you can do that through their website. So that app comes from the Australian Council on Children and the Media, and it's both presenting movie reviews and app reviews. Because we're focusing on the tech today, I've just looked at apps just then, but I'd really encourage you to look at that in a bit more depth. It's available on all platforms and indeed is available on your phone as well. So as we finish up this idea of healthy media use and concerns around this, we're going to now move into how do we harness media for learning? How do we get to the place where this is actually positive? So as we talked about, it's not really just about time, but it's about quality as well. It's about this idea that we are what we eat. So I leave you with this question of what's your media diet like? When are you consuming content that may be inappropriate, and when are you creating?